With the help of Hashem, we are learning Yoma Daf Ayin Dalid. We are dedicating this class L'Refuah Shalema to Yehuda, to Yisrael Yehuda Binyamin ben Devoida Dobra. May he have a Refuah Shalema. Amen. And I would also like, before the intro, just to make a correction, that after the terrible civil war, we had 600 men that remained alive from the tribe of Binyamin, which is also a terrible small number, and not the 300 that we mentioned yesterday. Now, we left off right after the Mishnah on Daf Ayin Gimel Amud Beis. We spoke about the 5 Inuyim. We spoke about the shiur of the isur of both Achila and Shasiya, how Oichlin are mitzdarfin, how Mashkin are mitzdarfin, but Oichlin and Mashkin are not mitzdarfin. And as we mentioned, that we're going to start learning the machlokes between Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish concerning chatzi shiur. Now, their machlokes is regarding part of a shiur by prohibited foods, but as we already learned in Shabbos and in many other places, that we actually apply chatzi shiur to other isurim as well. But coming back to the original machlokes, Rabbi Yochanan says chatzi shiur is asur min haTorah. Reish Lakish says that chatzi shiur is muter min haTorah. We're going to be learning, questioning whether the concept of mushba v'oimid mahar Sinai, and therefore ein isur chal al isur, ein shvua chal al shvua, is only concerning an isur d'oraisa, or even by an isur d'Rabbanan. In other words, since the Torah says that we may not deviate from the words of the sages, if there is already an isur d'Rabbanan on a person, if a person then makes an oath either to keep it or, God forbid, to the opposite, whether we say the concept of since your mushba v'omer mahar Sinai, the shvua is not chal or not, we're going to be learning the reasons and the sources for both Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish. And on Daf Ayin Dalid Amud Beis, we're going to have a series of braises that will set the parameters of the mitzvah of afflicting oneself on Yom Kippur. And as we learned in our Mishnah, it only applies to the 5 Inuyim. The Gemara is going to question, why doesn't it apply to other behaviors that could be considered an Inui, and they are considered an Inui in the Torah. We're going to learn about how the Torah uses the words Inui when it comes to marital relations, how the Torah uses the word Inui when it came to giving us the manna, which is actually going to be the opening shot for tomorrow's daf, which is going to be purely Agadata, a lot about the man, Vaya'ancha, Vayarivecha. And we're going to start, God willing, at least learning some Agadic teachings where we have a machlokes between Avami and Avasi of how to interpret the meaning or the Agadata, the drasha, the drush of a pasuk, and much, much more. So today's daf is mamash a daf of Nigla, and that will be in the contrast to, God willing, tomorrow's daf will be a daf of Agadata and of Chasidus. So let us start on daf Ayin Gimel Amud Beis. These are very important sugyas. The Gemara says that when the Mishnah opens up Yom HaKippurim Asur Ba'achila Ushasiya, the Gemara's question is based on a premise that the word Asur, which sounds to us, wow, prohibited, Adarabah, it means it's not that terrible. It's, so to say, only Asur. The premise of the question is that when there is an Isur Karis, the Mishnah wouldn't say Asur. The Mishnah would say Chayiv, which is a much stronger expression. So, fact the Gemara, Asur, says only Asur. Anush Karasu. Now, before we go on, I want to reiterate something and then to add something. Yesterday, we correctly said there is a very important machlokes rishonim throughout our sugya. We have Rashi and Tosfos and many others on one side, versus the Rambam and many other rishonim on the other side, as to whether aside of Achilo Shasiya, the other 4 Yenuyim, are they midoiraisa or are they midrabanan? And as we will learn, Rashi and Tosfos only midrabanan. The only isur midoiraisa on Yom Kippur, even though the Torah never specified any behavior that we have to refrain of, is not eating, not drinking. Rambam holds and many other Rishonim that all of the 5 Inuyim are asan midoiraisa, but even according to Tosfos, the only activity for which one is chayiv karis is for eating and drinking. Even though L'shitas Rambam, I mean that all the other 4 Yinoim is asan midoiraisa, but you're not going to be chayiv karis. The Mishnah began with achilo shasiya. L'kula alma, for achilo shasiya, there's a penalty of karis. So the question is based on the verbiage of the Mishnah, based on the premise that will be challenged on Daf Ayin Daled. Asur means like a weak isur. How can the Mishnah use that expression? So Omar Ravi Lavitei Rabbi Yirmiyah Elohim. Nitzracha, the reason why Rebbe uses the word asur, so to say only asur, is elo lachatzi shiur. That even if a person, the word chatzi means half, but it doesn't mean half. It means less part of the amount. Now, the penalty, in our case, kadis, b'shoigig chatos, in other cases, karbin, in other cases, karbin, malkis. Penalty is only after you add the minimum amount. So, for example, when God says one should not eat not kosher, and if a person, God forbid, eats, let's say, a pig, chayiv malkis, only if they eat a kazayas or more. If they ate less than that, in our case, if you ate less than the shiur, that is where the Mishnah uses the expression asur. Asur then would mean it's asur midoraisa, even though you don't get a penalty. But so if you had the shiur, the Mishnah should have said chayiv. If you don't have the shiur, this is shitas reish lakish, how can you say the word asur? So for that, the Gemara says, who said the word asur means midoraisa? Asur can mean midrabanan. The itmar, as it was stated, this is the machloikes, chatzi shiur Rabbi Yechanan amar asur min ha-Torah. Reish lakish amar muter min ha-Torah. So the Gemara is just wording out the question. Hanicha Rabbi Yechanan is good. Elo reish lakish ma'ika l'meimar. So the Gemara says, no, moide reish lakish asur midrabanan. And by the way, if you remember, in the whole Masechta Shabbos, that was taka, the way we word everything. Chayiv in Shabbos means midoraisa. Asur taka means patur avol asur. Asur means midrabanan. It's perfect. Now, it's not a kasha Rabbi Yechanan, but the word asur fits midrabanan. Very good. We are up to 5 lines before the bottom of the Amid. Baruch atah Adino Eloheinu melech haolam shehakol nivei b'dvarim. Asks the Gemara, Ihachi is a question on Reish Lakish. That is, that if even Reish Lakish is going to subscribe that chatzi shir, which is muter midoraisa. That means you can mamash eat it. You're not violating God's rule, but it's asur midrabanan lo nichayiv alei korban shvuam. If someone takes an oath, and there are different categories of oaths. The first one, which the Torah enumerates, which the Rambam categorizes, is called shvuas bitoy, which is a oath of an utterance. If a person swears not to do something and then they do it, then normally they're going to be chayiv a korban. Now, the din is, if chatzi shiur is even l'reish lakish asur midrabanan, one should not be chayiv for violating one's own oath. What case are we referring to? So we're going to quote now a Mishnah in Shavuos that was interpreted by Reish Lakish and Rabbi Yechanan, and it's going to apparently contradict this shita that we learned in Shavuos. If a person says Shvua, shaloi oichal. Now, and then he went and he ate, God forbid, nevelas and trefer shkatzim and amasim. Aside of the chiyuv for eating non-kosher, chiyuv malchus, so the Tanach holds he's also chayiv the korban for violating his utterance. He said not to eat, and he ate. Problem with that shita is that there is a rule called ein shvua chalal shvua, based on the klal ein isur chalal isur, based on the concept that we are mushba v'oimed mahar Sinai, already not to eat nevelas and trefer shkatzim and amasim. So even though his shvua was to back up the Torah, doesn't matter. It wasn't chal. There was no need for it. So therefore, you should not be chayiv. And indeed, Rab Shimon says that he's not chayiv for violating his oath. For the shvuas bita, you'll be chayiv a korban. You're not chayiv. You're chayiv for eating treif. And we asked over there in Shavuos, what's the pshat of the Tanach? But we have to understand, why would the Tanach say chayiv? Everyone subscribes to the rule that once and since one is already mushba v'oimed mahar Sinai, so then isur shana ein isur chalal isur ein shvua chalal shvua. And on that we had 2 approaches. First approach was from Rav and Shmuel and Rabbi Yechanan. These are the good rules that say that bekoilol dvarim hamutarim dvarim asurim. right? It's called an isur koilel, that if the second oath, in our case, the oath that we took in Har Sinai was the first oath. The second oath is this individual's. If he included in the same oath items that are permitted, so for example, Rashi writes that he said specifically, I swear that I won't eat basar shchuta, let's say just for today, and I won't have basar nevela. Now, Taka, if he only would have made an oath not to have basar nevela, based on the rule that you're mushba v'oimed mahar Sinai, ein isur chalal isur, ein shvua chalal shvua, it wouldn't be chal. But since he said two statements, shvua that I won't eat basar shchuta, shvua that I won't eat basar nevela. So the rule is, I'm reading inside Rashi, migu de chayla ahateira chayla nami ayisura. No, it's since the oath that he makes is more inclusive, it's chal on basar shchuta, it's also chal on basar nevela. That must be the case of the Tanach. Now, if that's the case, what about Rab Shimon? So Rashi tells us, it's good to remember this, that Rab Shimon does not subscribe to this migu. He doesn't subscribe to this isur koilel. Even by an isur koilel, ein isur halal isur. That's why you spot it. Let's go back in the Gemara. All of that was the way that Rav and Shmuel and Rabbi Yechanan explains the Mishnah. However, the last line in the Amid is Shlakish, Amar, and Achanami. I'll give you another pshat. So we have over there in Shavuos another Mishnah, which is Gavaldik. If a person makes an oath, I swear that I will not eat. Now, when God says don't eat, we know the shiurim is midoiraisa, halacha lo Moshe Sinai, Hashem means a kezayis. What about lashon b'nei adam? If I say I swear that I won't eat, when will I be violating, God forbid, my oath? If I eat a kezayis, do we have the same shiurim? Because I said eating, or since it was an oath that I made, it means any amount. Machloikes chachamim and abakiv. So comes along Resh Lakish and he says that according to Shitas Chachamim, who say that even in my personal oath, eating means a kezayis. So he's going to explain that the case where the Tanach will hold that he's chayiv a korban for violating his oath, I shkotzim and avasam yechayiv anyway. Says Resh Lakish, l'shitosei. Resh Lakish holds chatzi shir is muter min ha'Torah. The person said, I swear that I won't eat even a chatzi shir. Resh Lakish l'shitosei gavaldik. Chatzi shir is muter min ha'Torah. You're not mushba v'oimed. He made an oath not to eat a half, and he ate a half a shir. That's when he'll be chayiv according to the Tanach. I'll leave it at Rabban, but I'll leave it at Rabban, and he has to say, I swear I won't eat a half a shir. Because according to the Rabban, if he just said stam, I swear I won't eat, then eating also means a kazayis. Oi, bestam, daf ayin dalad, I'll leave it at Rabbi Akiva, the Amar, that Lashon b'nei Adam, and by Shvuos, and by Nedarim, halech achar Lashon b'nei Adam, Adam oiser atzmei b'chol shu. Bottom line is that Reish Lakish explains the Mishnah in Shavuos, l'shitasoi, since chatzi shir is muter min ha'Torah, for a chatzi shir, then you're not mushba v'oimed. Now, if Reish Lakish would have held chatzi shir is muter not only min ha'Torah but also midrabanan, then this answer is a good answer. But now that we said that even according to Reish Lakish, the Mishnah can say the word asur because even Reish Lakish chatzi shir is asur midrabanan. So Rashi reminds us that we have a pasuk in Shoftim that says loisasur. We're not allowed to deviate from the words of the sages. So we are mushba, v'oimed, mahar Sinai, even according to Reish Lakish, not to eat a half a shir on the velas and trefish, katzim and amasim. So the question comes back. Gavaldik. And if you're going to answer second line, the kiv and the islay heterim and atoiram, even though there is this general lav loisasur, but since at the end of the day, biblically it's permitted, kochayel korban shvua, because the rule that mushba v'oimed mahar Sinai can only go when we are mushba biblically and not a din darabanan that's included in the general loisasur. If you're going to try to give me that answer, so I'm going to try to refute that answer because v'hatran yet another Mishnah in Shavuos. Now there's another category of oaths. So aside of the category of Shavuos bitui, there's something called Shavuos ha'edus. Shavuos ha'edus means that if you have two litigants and there is a third party that they know testimony that would benefit in a beis din for one of the litigants. It has to be when their testimony would have benefited, and they know it. And the litigant that will benefit tells this potential aid, come and testify. And the person denies knowledge under an oath. Then there's another unique din. By the way, Shvuas Ha'edus, right? That's one of the 3 cases at the end of Vayikra where you have a Korban Oil V'Yored. Doesn't matter the punishment. So then, and then the person does tshuva. So when the person denies, ich weiß nicht, no one knows. The person does tshuva, they have to bring what we call the Korban Oil V'Yored. So says the Mishnah that Shvuas Ha'edus Einoi Noiheges Ela B'Ru'uyim L'Hoyed. It only applies to those who are eligible to testify. Now here's the problem. When you hear the statement, it makes perfect sense. But if you will remember the Mishnah and Shavuos, right before these words, the Mishnah already gave examples. The Mishnah already spoke out, and Rashi reminds us that it says that noiheges ba'anoshim v'loy b'noshim, because halachically women are not kosher witnesses. B'rechoikim v'loy b'karovim, because close relatives are not kosher witnesses. B'kshedim, which is even a more generic term, but the Mishnah already v'loy b'psulim. No, the Mishnah already spoke it out. So when we learned that Mishnah, again, we asked Lema'utamai, what else is being included in this klal that Shvuas Ha'edus Einu Neheges Ela B'Ru'im L'Hoyed that's not already clear in the examples the Mishnah gave. And on that Rav Papa said Lema'utai Melech, which is a Gavaldik Kedin, what we learned in Sanhedrin, that a Melech loy megid v'loy me'idin. And by the way, there's an exception, but let's leave that alone. Then Rav Acha bar Yaakov Omar, that Mishnah is lema'utei mesachik bekuvia. Mesachik bekuvia literally means someone who plays with the dice. It means someone whose main source of income is from gambling, based on the concept that even though 2 people who are gambling made an understanding, they made an agreement that if the dice falls on this number, this guy will win. On the other one number, the other one would win. But based on the rule, there's not enough time to go through the details. We'll learn this more in Sanhedrin, that asmachta loy kanya. So therefore, on a rabbinic level, it's called theft. I'm saying on a rabbinic level because midoi raisa, theft means if a person takes money out of someone else's pocket. By gambling, no one is doing it. Says the victim party, he's giving it up, but he's not giving it with his heart. He only agreed because he was hoping he will win. Unlike a lottery, the upside is so big. And the investment, if you call that an investment, is $1. Today it's $2 or $3 or whatever the money is. So that the dream is worth $1. That's not called mesachik bekuvia. You take give it up. Masha'enkein, when a person goes gambling, they don't. No one walks out of Vegas with $1 less in his or her pocket. They walk out there with a lot more. Okay. Now the problem is like this. Mesachik bekuvia. We know, like we just mentioned, midoi raisa mechzei chazik. He's not called a ganaf midoi raisa. The problem with someone who makes a livelihood from gambling, it's only v'rabbanan hu dekapaslu. Yet, according to Rav Acha bar Yaakov, v'loy kochayla alei shavua. Now we are making a comparison between Shvuas Ha'edus and Shvuas Bitui. And it makes sense. In other words, as far as the laws of Shvuas are concerned, l'cha'ura, even if the problem is only of a rabbinic nature, by Shvuas Ha'edus, you are excluded from the parsha of Shvuas Ha'edus. So we're back to our kasha. If we would not have said that Reish Lakish, Chatzi Shiros Asan Midrabanan, then of course it makes sense what Reish Lakish says in the Mishnah in Shavuos, that the reason why, according to the Tanach, you'll be chayev for Shavuos Bitoy is because you swore, I'm not going to eat a half a shear, there's no mushba ba'omet. But now that we said that even according to Reish Lakish, Chatzi Shiros Asan Midrabanan, l'cha'ura, we do apply mushba ba'omet even by an isur derabanan. And the Gemara says that's not correct. The concept of ein shvua halal shvua, based on ein isur halal isur, that's how we're learning the sugya, is only on an isur doiraisa. Emes, the Torah says loy sasur, but still shvua is chal. You're bringing a raya from shvua sa'edus that even if someone is only pasal midrabanan to testify, and if he swore he doesn't know knowledge, he's not included in the parsha of shvua sa'edus. We're not saying that he swore be'emes. That's another penalty. But he's not included in Shvuas Ha'edus because he's only Pasal Midrabanan. Yeah, that's unique to Shvuas Ha'edus. Shani Hassan, because the Torah says that's in the end of Vayikra regarding Shvuas Ha'edus, Im lo yagid, if he does not testify, and Chazal Kaich, if he doesn't testify means, if he doesn't testify, a testimony that would have helped. Now, if his testimony doesn't help, even only Midrabanan, but it doesn't help. V'hai la baragoduhu klal. So, Minegeh Shvuas Ha'edus, he won't be chayiv the carbon shvua oil of yored. The negea shvuas bitoy, since midoiraisa you're not mushba v'oimed on a chatzi shiur, and if you are mafarish chatzi shiur or l'rabbanan or l'rabakiva stam, yes, it fits. You will still be chayiv according to the Tanach. Okay, now we're going to go back to the beginning of the Gemara. We began today by a premise that how can the Mishnah say the word asur if it's chayiv kares? Who says? Maybe even by a chiyuv kares, Atana says asur. Then b'chal there's no shayla. Says the Gemara v'choleiche the tani anush kares what loy tana asur. I'll show you what's not the case. V'hatanya. Now this is a brayso speaking about all of the 5 inuyim of Yom Kippur. And guys, nachamal, even according to the Rambam v'siyatoi, that the other 4 inuyim are asur mido oiraisa, anush kares l'kula almas only on achil l'shasiyah. Even though the Torah says ta'anos nafsher seichem, b'chol nefesh asher lo yisu'una v'nichrasa. The Torah says that your chayv kares for not afflicting yourself. Kares is only for eating and drinking. It says in a braysa afal pisho amru asur b'kulam, even though Chazal say asur b'kol asur, that's the word. On all 5, nevertheless, lo amru anush kares ela lo eichel v'shoyse. And not for the inuyim, for someone who does the malacha bilvad. So what do we see from this braysa? That the braysa says afal pisho amru asur bekulan, my friends, what does bekulan mean? Also eating and drinking. And the Braisa uses the word asur. So the whole question that we began is not correct. Says the Gemara, no. If there is an isur kares, the Tana would write chayiv. Asur implies it's not on the level of kares. What's the pshat in this Braisa? Hachika amar, that kisha amru asur, taka. Asur means you're only prohibited. No chiyuv kares, lo yamru ela b'chatzi shiur. Add all that on the braysa. Aval kishiur, then anush kares. And then the braysa clarifies that afal pisha anush kares, you should know it's not on all the 5 inuyim. Ein anush kares elo eichel v'shoyse v'oisem alacha b'lvad. Okay. The Ibo Yisema, my friends, goes back to the beginning of the Gemara. The Gemara began asur anush karesu. The Ibo Yisema, I'll tell you better. Now that we quoted the Braisa, that on the other 4 Yinuyim, right, Rechitza, Sicha, Ne'ilas Hasadal, and Tashma Shamita, the Braisa, the Rabbanan, regardless, you're not Chayiv Kares, so that's why the Braisa says Asur. He, Katani Asur, Asha Ara. And like the Tanu, Rabba, Rabbi Yosef, Bishar, Sifrei, the Beirav, this is important. Sifrei, the Beirav, means the other Sfarim from the academy of Rav. So I guess the book, we call that, some people pronounce it Safra or Sifra, is Toiras Kohanim, which is on Vayikra. Sifri, Lashon Rabim, we're speaking about Midrashim, just to take a step back. Many people, when they hear Midrash, they think, Agadata. Sometimes, yeah, we have what we call halachic Midrashim. And the Iker, what are they? The Sifra, the book, Toiras Kohanim, same book, either called this or called the book or called Toras Kahanim, and that's the Sifrei, which is halachic midrashim and bamidbar and devarim. So he's quoting from the Sifrei that we can put him. Sha'asur berechitza v'sicha ubenil sazal tashamita. Now this is the other 4 yinuyim. So the Braisa says Talmud Leimer. Now before we explain the answer, the fact that it doesn't say Talmud Leimer that ta'anu is nafshay seichem. The Torah links kares with the lack of ta'anas nafshay seichem. Clearly, we see from the Braisa that the source for the other 4 yinuyim is not from the words ta'anas nafshay seichem, even though it's merumas in it, whether it's midoraisa or midorabbanan. So that's just a raya already, that for that you're not chayiv kares. Now, what's this proof? Because since it says Shabbosayin, so Rashi explains their proof. By Shabbos, it says Shabbosayin, we have that word. And by Yom Kippur, we have the word Shabbos Shabbosayin. Just like by Shabbos, Rashi holds that the 4 Yinoim are only Yasam Midrabanan. It fits easier. If whoever learned Masechta Shabbos, there is an expression unique to Shabbos called Shvus. Shvus means refrain from working. So you have the Lamates Malachas that are Asam Midoiraisa. There it's Chiv Skila and Kares. And then we have a Shvus. Let's go with Rashi, the Rabbanan. So since the Torah uses the word Shabbos and by Yom Kippur, it also means, says the Sifri, that you have Isurei Doiraisa, Inoi, not eating, not drinking, and then you have Shvus, the other 4. Rambam learns different. Rambam understands that Shvus means Midoiraisa. God is saying refrain. The point is that the fact that you need to have another word in the Chumash to teach us the Raisa, or it's only Larashi and Asmachta, the Rabbanan, that you can't do the 4 Inuyim, L'kula Alma, you're not Chayiv Kares. So this is very important. So we're entering the Masechta, the Perek, 5 Inuyim, eating and drinking is the first. The only one for which you Chayiv Kares is for, God forbid, eating and drinking, obviously more than the shiurim. Less than the shiurim, you're also not violating, you're not refraining from afflicting yourself midaraisa. The other 4 Inuyim, for sure, is not Chayiv Kares. L'Rashi, L'Toisvis, and other shvus, taka only asan midrabanan. L'Rambam, he understands this shvus to mean a isur de oirais. Okay, let's move on, it's late. No, even according to the Rambam, there's only kares for eating and drinking. That's the klal. Once you get that, that's the whole halacha of the 5 Inuyim. Huh? Correct. There's no kares for the 4 Inuyim. Very good. And now that we mentioned Chatzi Shir, this is such a rich sugya, like wow. The Amid base today is very easy. I know, but it's getting late. But the people spent in yeshiva a long time learning the next little piece of shtickle over here. Gufa we learned above. Chatzi Shir. The machlokes is regarding eating. Again, the big debate is whether we apply this to other isurim. And yes, the consensus is yes, but ain't zman for this right now. If a person eats that which Torah says not to eat, but less than the prescribed amount. Now, to get the punishment, let's say stam for not kosher, malchus. For sure, everyone holds you only get the oynish if you had the shiur or more, God forbid. But if a person had chatzi shiur, doesn't mean half, it means part of the shiur. So that's why Rashi today in the beginning on Daf Ayin Gimel on Beis in the Gemara says chatzi shiur by Yom Kippur means pachus mikoiseva sagasa. Chatzi shiur can mean you ate 99% of the shiur. By Yom Kippur it's a large date. That's called chatzi shiur. Part, not the whole shiur. Rabbi Yechanan says asur min haTorah. Reish Lakish says muter min haTorah. And now let's explain their argument. Rabbi Yechanan amar asur min haTorah. He has a logic. What's his logic, my friends? Kiven the chazile, it's tarufei, it's fit to combine. Let me give you an example. It's on Yom Kippur, and a person has half of a kiseva sagas. If he would have another only half, then he'll be chayiv karas. So the fact that the half that you ate will combine with a potential, God forbid, other half. If what you ate right now was completely permitted, how can something permitted combine and make an isur? Since it's fit to combine, it must mean it's already a problem. It's not poison enough to give you kares, but it's already poison enough that it's asur. So therefore, what you're eating has to be asur. It can't be that you eat heter, and boom, and it becomes asur. Now, there's so many questions on this. The biggest question is basar v'chalav. Basar is mutter, chalav is mutter. And mutter, completely permitted. Yet, if you combine them, it's asur. Another big point, just to speak out, is ein azman. What's pshat chazi leitz taruf in yeshiva? Siman or siba? Let me explain what I mean. What happens if a person eats, Rabbi Yechanan, a half a koiseves at the last second of Yom Kippur? That means, even if this person is going to eat the entire shiur, there isn't enough time to eat the whole shiur on Yom Kippur. So if chazi litztarufe is a siman, it means that I don't care if this will end up combining, or if this can never technically combine. Since it's something that is combinable, if you would have eaten it earlier, is a siman. These are the words of Rabbi Isura ka'achal. Or no, it has to be more than that. It has to be something that could actually combine. And if, like in the example that I gave, the half a shir was eaten at the last rega of Yom Kippur, and even if this Yid, God forbid, will eat the other half a shir, it's going to be already after Yom Kippur, then maybe even when Rabbi Yechanan, you're not going to be asur midorais. That's another big topic. Let's go. Shlakish Amar muter min haTorah pashut. The Torah says, "Thou shalt not eat." I know those words are not used on Yom Kippur, but that's generally the rule of Chatzi Shir. Let's go to Treif Chelev. So when God says, "Thou shalt not eat," we know from Gemira that shiurim, halacha l'Moshe Messinai, eating means a kazais. If you didn't go against what God said, then you were not violating any biblical prohibition. Achilo, Amar Achman Avalek. Eisve Rabbi Yechanan l'Reish Lakish. From a brayso. Now this brayso is based on a pasuk that we have in Sav that speaks about the prohibition of eating the fats of a domesticated animal. The Torah writes, "Kol chelev," Kol chaylev. All the chaylev. From a shiur, from a chesed, from a eiz, loy soy chaylu, etc., etc. And up two psukim later, the Torah says that if someone ate it, kares. Like we mentioned, that chaylev is even more prohibited. It's more chamur than chazer. Chaylev only from a domesticated animal because chaylev chay is mutter. Now, says the Braisa, ainly elo kol sheyeshnei ba'oinish yeshnei ba'azara. Braisa says clearly, you would think, since the Torah juxtaposes the prohibition, don't eat, and the punishment, two psukim later, l'kula alma, the punishment is only when you have the shiur. So you would think, says the Braisa, that when are you prohibited biblically? Only if you are eating the same amount, that's going to bring you the penalty of kares. And therefore, you might have thought, now before we come to the chatzi shiur, we have here, guys, some people pronounce it koi. My teacher pronounced it kvi. The machloikis and chulin daf pei, very important. Whether a kvi is a crossbreed from a behem and a chaya, or whether kvi is a certain type of animal that is like a min bifnei atzma. It's not a behem, it's not a chaya. Here the question is, if a kvi is a crossbreed, which means we don't know halachically how to define it, whether it's a domesticated or a non-domesticated animal. So therefore, we have a suffix how to define a chaylev. If it's a chayam, then the chaylev is mutter b'chaylev. If it's a behemoth, then it's also with kares. So it says the Braisa, if you ate the chaylev of a kvi or the chatzi shiur, now you can't say that someone is going to get punished with kares if what they did is only a suffix. So you would think that since by the kvi and by the chatzi shiur, since you're not going to be penalized, maybe you're not even prohibited. This is a Braisa. Talmud loimer. That's why the pasuk in Sav opens up kol chaylev. Why? It's right chaylev. You know what kol means? Any amount, even from the kvi. Kol chaylev. Now this l'choyr is mamish against Reish Lakish. Now don't tell me that's only by chaylev, because this is a case where the Torah is megala once, and this becomes a binyan av l'chol ha'Torah kula. That even when there's no einish, there is the azara. So answers the Gemara, no, the Shlakish knows the Braisa, and the Braisa means only us and midrabanan. We're quoting a pasuk, classical. That's called an asmachta. It's called that after the Chachamim make a gzeira, after they make up a rule, they look for a biblical allusion, and they lean it on it. But just because we have in the words of Chazal, shenemar, or because the chsiv, it doesn't always mean it's a doiraisa. It's the Rabbanon v'kras machta ba'alma. And hachinam mistabra, because the isal kadaitach that we learn from the kol doiraisa, doesn't make sense that God wrote the word kol to be marba chelev of a kvi. Why not? Because the kasha is based on the shita that a kvi is not a min b'fnei yatzmai. Kvi is it's one or the other. We don't know. There's a rule. Whenever there is a doubt, that we don't know the answer, Hashem will never write in a word in the Torah to address that case, because God, from God's perspective, He knows. And from our perspective, we are expected that whenever there's a suffix that we have in a din do'iraisa, we have to be machmer. So there's no need for Hashem to write a word to include a case of suffix. So kvi sveikahu. So itzrich kral asuy sveika avadenish. So therefore, it must be asmachta. Now the Gemara says, no. Again, Reish Lakish is not refuted. You can learn pshat that it's an asmachta, but the raya that you have is no raya. You know why? Because I would counter-argue that the Tan of this Braisa doesn't hold that kvi is a suffix behem, a suffix chayim. This Braisa holds that a kvi it's not a crossbreed. There's a certain type of animal that is called a beria bifnei atzma or a min bifnei atzma. Let's turn that ayin dalad amid base. Kvi beria bifnei atzmahu, and for that, it's for sure there's no isur kados. Why is that? Because the isur kados is only on a behema. And the Torah is saying that on that, if you learn pshat that it's midoiraisa, that even though it's a beria bifnei atzma, there is an isur to have the chelev of a kvi. And like the Gemara says, the iloi teimahachem, that what? That the art tanoim that's ascribed to the shita, that kvi beria bifnei atzma, chodam ravidi baraven. Now, what is the Rabbi Barav referring to? Oh, Gavaldi. So we have here, Rashi reminds us that when the Torah prohibits blood consumption, really the Torah prohibits many times blood consumption, both from a bird and from behemoths. By the way, behemoths in the context of dam doesn't only mean domesticated animals, but sometimes, if you remember, behema means it includes both behema and chaya. And now the Tana uses a klal upratu klal to include other bloods. Question is, which other bloods are included? If the Torah speaks about birds, the Torah speaks about behemoths, and in the context of animals, behema is a bigger generic word. Behema means behema and chaya. So says the Braisa, afkol, when we included, afkol is not the word kol, it's from a klal prato klal, that we include what else? Lasuye kvi. And now the same kasha. Why would we need a klal prato klal to include a kvi if kvi is only sfeikahu? So itzrach kra. The itzrach kra means the klal prato klal. La rabuya sfeika. For God, He knows what it is. So either it's permitted or it's prohibited. And if we don't know, so anyways we're gonna not do it because we'll have a doubt. Ella, that Braisa subscribes to the Shita Beri Yashani, Hachinami Beri Yashani. Atkan, Rabbi Yechanan and Ishlakish. And now we're going to come back to Yom Kippurim. And now, again, whether the other Inuyim, we're going to focus now on the Inuyim of eating and drinking. Then there's another 4. And now we're going to go and address that there's potentially other behaviors that one might have called an affliction. And how do we know that they are not included in the mitzvah of ta'anu es nafshei seichem on Yom Kippur? I know it's going to sound strange, but for example, why wouldn't one be obligated to sit in the hot sun or to sit in the cold for people who feel afflicted? Some people here love the cold. They go v'chulei. But for people that when it's cold they're afflicted, maybe God says afflict yourself, schwitz. Like, why are we only limiting it, again, either to all the 5 according to the Rambam and according to Rashi and Tosfos, only to eating and drink? Another heads up. The Torah writes, it's really 6 times, but in a similar way, 5 times, the words ta'anu es nafshei seichem. These words are written twice in Parshas Achrimois, which is the Parsha of Yom Kippur, towards the end, after the Avodah. The Torah writes twice that we should afflict ourselves in Parshas Emor. And the Torah writes it once in Pinchas by the Korbanos of Yom Kippur. Okay, so Tanach Rabbanon, when it says Ta'anu es nafshei seichem, you shall afflict yourselves. Yachol, you might think that Yesha b'chama, that there should be a mitzvah to go sit in the sun, or betzina. Why? Kadeshi, it's time to suffer, to afflict yourself. Talmud Leimer, therefore the Torah juxtaposes to the isur to the mitzvah of inui, the prohibition of doing work. How do we fulfill the kamalach sasu? By shev al taisa, by not doing mamalacha shev al taisa. Afin eat, don't drink, even if you're going to add, don't bathe, don't. It's all about not doing. Go sit in the sun. That's not included. The ema. Aren't there cases where you would fulfill affliction by shev al taisa, by chama and by tzina, which will be that if a person is already sitting in the sun and it's hot, maybe here there will be a mitzvah not to leave. Loi neima leikum tuv betula. Don't sit in the shade. Shev al taisa. Why? Afflict yourself, suffer. Maybe apply it that if a person is sitting in the shade and v'karalei and it's cold, loi neima leikum tuv b'shimsha. So here you are fulfilling an inui by shev al taisa. So the answer is the Braisa, no. It has to be completely compatible, similar to malacha. My malacha loichalaktabam, where we don't differentiate. The way we fulfill the isur of not working is always by shev al taisa. Af inui has to go on a type of category where there will never be an option of fulfilling the inui by doing something. Now, hot and cold, there are scenarios where you can remain hot by not leaving the sun, but there are scenarios where that affliction will be by putting yourself in the sun. So none of it is included in the inui. Now we're going to have another Baraisa that's going to be asking the same question, but it's going to have a different approach, how to exclude it from eating. Here again, maybe Inui also means making sure that you put yourself in a place where you're very hot or where you're very cold. So Talmud, this is a different approach. It's based on the juxtaposition to the mitzvah of Inui, to the prohibition of working. So we say, Ma melacha, davar shechayavin olav. Chayav and olav, guys. Chayiv means kares. At least let's take that away from today. Chayav and olav makim acher, just like the Isur Malacha, isn't unique to Yom Kippur. There is, at least in one other place, an Isur Malacha chiyuv kares. We are Shabbos. Oh, so af inui, it must be what type of inui? Shechayavin olav b'makim acher. You have to find a other area where you may not. Now, there's many Isuri Achila for which there's a Chiyuv Kares, which is great. So it's going to apply to a prohibition where we find elsewhere with the Chiyuv Kares. Here again, obviously, the Chiyuv Kares, even according to the Rambam, doesn't go in the 4 Inuim. We don't find elsewhere. But when again, eating and drinking, there are plenty Isuri Da'iraisa for which are Chayiv Kares, like Chaylev. So the Torah says, don't do that on Yom Kippur. And the Eizazeh, pigel and noiser. That's the example. So if a person eats pigel or noiser, the chayiv kares. So it says the Baraisa, if that's the case, so why don't we say that on Yom Kippur, one has to afflict oneself by not eating pigel and noiser? It's asur anyway. No, maybe on Yom Kippur, you're going to be chayiv, let's say, 2 chatois if a person ate b'shoigig. One for the pigel and one for eating pigel on Yom Kippur. So maybe Avi only pigel the noiser because they are indeed bekares. Again, practically, a person will be chayv 2 chatois, but maybe v'lo Avi even tevel. Tevel is asur midoraisa. Tevel is much more serious in its punishment than eating chazer. For tevel, if a person eats tevel, you chayv misa b'dei shamayim, but misa b'dei shamayim is not as bad as kares. V'lo Avi yasa tevel she'ena chayv she'ena b'kares, only misa. So this Baraisa is not going to count the 5 inuyim. The Baraisa will continuously make a point that since God wrote many times, afflict yourself, why is it written many times to include? It's all in the category where there is elsewhere in Isur Kares, which is eating a pigel and noiser. But we will include even tevel. So Talmud loimer ta'anu, and that would have been enough. But not only ta'anu, but shteit nachamal ve'inisem es nafshei seichem. By the way, both of these expressions you have in Achrimois, ta'anu ve'inisem. You have both of these expressions also in Emoir. Ta'anu, in other words, when the Torah mentions it, it's very repetitive. So riba. So the Baraisa says, okay, so then only, why don't we say that Avi Yatevel Shubha Misa? That means if a Yid, God forbid, eats pigel or noiser or even tevel on Yom Kippur, not only are the chayiv kares for pigel or noiser, not only are the chayiv misa b'dei shemaim for tevel, they're also chayiv kares for eating on Yom Kippur because they did not afflict themselves. They didn't refrain from eating. But for Le'yavi Yasa Nevela. Nevela is not kares. Nevela is not misa. It's relatively only b'malchus, b'lav. She'ena b'misa. So Nachamal says the Baraisa. Not only does it say ta'anu, but it noch adds, repeats v'inisam es nafshei seichem. So weiter ribam. Furthermore, avik sanavela shubalav. But how do you know that you're chayv kares for eating chulin? Because this Baraisa's approach is that the Torah's juxtaposition of inui with kol malacha leisasu, it has to be just like by malacha. The Isur Malachi isn't unique to Yom Kippur. We find the Chiyuv Kares elsewhere. So again, maybe we would limit the not eating to a food that is prohibited if it's completely chulin, and there is no Isur elsewhere to eat chulin. Maybe you're not going to be Chayv Kares. Again, Talmud Leimer, not only Ta'anu, but also the Inisim es Nafshei Sechem, so Nacham al Ribam. Weiter, we're not done yet. What about food that otherwise, other than it being on Yom Kippur, there is a mitzvah to eat it for a kohen? So maybe if a kohen, God forbid, eats truma on Yom Kippur, at least he won't be chayiv kares. Not only is there no isur elsewhere, there's a mitzvah to eat it. So again, Talmud Leimer Ta'anu. And that would have been enough, but the Torah doesn't stop there. The Torah adds v'inisam es nafshei seichem riba. It's including more types in the isur of inui kares. The final step is obvious at truma, at least truma she'enoi bebal soisiru. In other words, there is never a time limit after which it will be forbidden to eat the truma. But maybe not only is it a mitzvah to eat kachim, but on the other hand, you mamash have to eat it now, whether it's one day and one night, whether it's the max 2 days and one night. So again, maybe if someone, God forbid, eats kachim kalam, even on Yisrael, on Yom Kippur, they shouldn't be chayiv kares, because elsewhere it's a mitzvah that's under time pressure. That's the first one for sure is included. So Talmud Leimer, the final time, Ta'anu would have been enough, and it says V'nisim es nafshei sechem suriba. So the steps and the brises for the Pashit Pshat, that which is the most similar to V'chomalach alei sasu that has an isur elsewhere is Pigel and Noiser. So we go Pigel and Noiser. Let's go. Then we went through Tebel. Then we went through Nevela, Cholin, Truma, and Kachim. So now the Braisa gives us a bam. Guys, whenever you hear the word in the Braisa, you know what that means? Means, and if you're going to say that this whole limud is not good. Now, why would anyone say it? The Braisa normally doesn't write. That's really a big part of the Gemara when it quotes a Braisa, is to chap. Why did the Braisa say the im nafshach loimer? Other Tanoim in Braisas and Toseftas didn't say the im nafshach loimer. They would say ve'oimer. They quote another source. And the Gemara would say, what was wrong with the first? For you have to say ve'oimer. This Braisa is more elaborate, but even in the more elaborate Braisa, the Braisa doesn't tell you what the problem is. So we're going to get in a moment to what the problem is. But for im nafshach loimer, if you're going to say there is a flaw in what we learned, it's nish good. So, and therefore we're back to the question: how do you know? Since God did not say don't eat on Yom Kippur, and we know Torah Shabbal Peh that the inui for which you chayv kares is achilo shasiyah. How do you know that? That since Hareyu Oimer, it says it's on Parshas Emor, that v'ha'avadati es hanefesh ahi, that I will destroy that soul. So nefesh inui shuhu avedas hanefesh. What type of inui that diminishes your soul? Notice v'havadati es hanefesh is for not doing inui, but it shines light to the definition of inui. Inui is something that diminishes the nefesh. You know what diminishes the nefesh? That's taka what happened. A person doesn't eat and drink, they become very weak. Nefesh doesn't mean a soul, really. Nefesh, when it says in Parshas Bereshis, Vayihi Adam lenefesh chaya, the taich of nefesh is a person, just to know. The taich of a nefesh is the combination of a neshama in a body. And that becomes weakened. And that's the nefesh. So now the end of Bryce. So whether we're going to have this whole juxtaposition, whether we're going to learn it from the fact that regarding the inui, the Torah says that if a person won't do inui, which is as adrush, that it has to be an inui of ibud nefesh, achilo shasiyam. That's the fact that is what is prohibited under the penalty of kares. And then again, we have the other four inuyim. And now the Gemara, the first white line, wants to know, exactly what's the problem with this whole juxtaposition with So explains the Gemara, I would argue here again, that maybe when the Torah speaks about Kares, even according to the Rambam, that Tashmish Hamita is Asr Midoiraisa, but there's no Kares. How do you know that? Maybe when Hashem says, Ta'anu es nafshei seichem, you know where we find in the Torah the words of inui when a person is not allowed or is unable to have marital relations. The refraining, here it's called aroyos. Now aroyos in this context doesn't mean prohibited sexual relations. It means sexual relations. That ba'aroyos komishto yikra. And this is great. And I'll tell you something. What was the whole word of the Braisa? The word of the Braisa is that when God spoke inui, karis, it's like malacha. By malacha, there's an isur of malacha elsewhere. Well, the same thing is with sex. There are many arroyos that take as the isur karis. It would fit. That's the question. So how the same shot you gave for eating we can give for arayos. And other rabbis say that tashmish amita is the inoi for which there is a chiyuv kares. And you know what? An achil and shasiyah should be like ritzicha, should be like sicha. That's why the Braisa needed to bring the final proof. If a person refrains from marital relations, there is no diminution of the soul. If a person refrains from eating and drinking, we all know that. There is diminution of the soul. You become weak right away. That's the final proof. Another Braisa. The Vei Rebbe Yishmael Tanach. In the yeshiva of Rabbi Yishmael, they quoted the following Braisa. That Neman kan Inoi. The Torah uses the word Inoi here by Yom Kippur. The Neman lahalon. My friends, we are opening the opening shot for Parshas Mon. If you think it's a skula to read the Parshas Mon every day, it's a double skula to learn here the sugya. Now we're beginning with the nigla part. Tomorrow it's going to be moededik about the Mon. Neman lahalon Inoi. Where do we find Inoi? So Rashi quotes from the beginning of Parshas Ekev, where Moshe Rabbeinu told the Yidden, Vaya'ancha, that God is saying, I afflicted you. Vayarivech, I made you hungry and I fed you the man. Well, it's not that you were hungry and that was resolved by the man. The Torah acknowledges that the man had some affliction aspect in it. Oh, so that's the word. What Inoi is chiyuv kares? Pashit. Ma lahalon Inoi ra'avain. Again, ra'avain doesn't mean that we hungered, but there is a hungering part of the eating of the manna. Vaya'ancha vayarivecha. Vaya'ancha. Gavaldik. Afkan, when it says in Yom Kippur Inoi, it means Inoi of ra'avain. Ra'avain of not eating. Not an Inoi of not bathing. Not an Inoi of sitting in the hot sun. The kares is Inoi. Aha. Now we have a real question, because the Torah uses the words inoi regarding refraining from marital relations. Where do we have that in Parshas Vayetze? At the big goodbye that Lavan gave his son-in-law, I could have killed you all. That was but I won't. So he threatened him. He told him that im ta'anes benoisai, if you dare afflict my daughters, which means if you withhold marital relations from my daughters. Which also included him telling Yaakov that he can't marry other wives, because then he'll be less time with the current wives. But the Torah uses the words inui. So here again, maybe when it says that on Yom Kippur we have to do inui onush kares, maybe it refers to tashmish amita. Answers the Gemara, donin inui derabim, Yom Kippur, every Yid has to do inui. Mon was given to all the Yidden. They are more compatible. The ein donen inoi derabim, which is the inoi of all the Yidden Yom Kippur, mi inoi di yachid. Yachid wasn't yachid, but it was, on the daughters of Lavan. And by the way, he had 4 daughters. All of them were his daughters. But it's still called yachid. Says the Gemara, we're not done yet. I will show you that there is a word of inoi regarding the refraining of marital relations used concerning all of the Jewish people, the Rabbim. Where do we find that? By Mitzrayim, right? Because it says, now don't look in Shemais, this is actually words that we say when we bring the Bikurim. But when we bring the Bikurim, we speak about our history. And in Parshas Kisavai, we say that Vayares Onyenu, that God saw our affliction. That's when we were in Egypt. And Chazal Kaich, we say this in the Haggadah. What is the inoi that happened to our grandparents in Egypt? Prishus derecheretz. That the laws, we were servants in a way that we were separated a lot more than normal. And that brought about an affliction. And God saw our affliction. Now, all of the Yidden had a hard time they couldn't be with their wives. Oh, so now you can't say Rabim Yachid when the inoi of Tashmish Amita, the Torah uses the words Vayares Onyenu. And that refers to inoi of Tashmish Derabim. So now it's amazing that there isn't even a havamina for inoi to mean both. Question is why? Inoi either means not to eat or not Tashmish Amita. Question is, which one are we going to use? Ella done in inoi b'dei shamayim, because it is God, the King, commanded us not to eat. Mi inoi b'dei shamayim, God gave us the manna, which is called food of affliction. and it's not we're not speaking, God forbid, derogatory about the man, but we'll see in a whole moment about the man. However, ve'ein done in inud b'dei shamayim, Yom Kippur, from Pari Melech Mitzrayim and his evil government. They were the ones that brought that affliction. So still, the inui of Yom Kippur is a lot more compatible to inui, eating, and therefore Hashem means, ta'anu, don't eat. That's called the inui. And now we quoted the man, so now let's begin. And indeed it says in Parshas Ekev, same Parsha where it says, Vaya'ancha vayarivecha, there we write that God, Moshe Rabbeinu was saying, that Hama achilcha mon b'midbar, that God Almighty gave us man in the desert. Here again, Laman anoischa, in order to afflict you. How are we afflicted? Wasn't the manna the best food in the world? It was. It had qualities that no other food has. It had no psoilus. We were only able to properly understand Torah only because we ate the man. So now we're beginning Rav Ami v'Rav Asi. Now this is also an intro just to get the hemshech that we're going to have many agadic teachings where we're going to have Rav Ami and Rav Asi, each one giving another interpretation. So Chad Amar, you know why the man is called the food of affliction? Because Eino doima mishi yesh pas besaloim. Pas besali means that you have food not only for today, for tomorrow also. And avada for the next day. People say here they get paid, they live paycheck to paycheck. Paycheck to paycheck means, let's say a person gets 2 paychecks a month, that sometimes in the month you have food for a whole 2 weeks. In the desert, we only had food for 1 day. And if a person took more than they should have taken, it melted. That's called affliction. In other words, that God was giving us the opportunity to train our emunah and bitachon. Truth be told, that the life that we have for most people now in the last moment of Golus is the same. It's not about one day to the other. Is that we have, Kanai Nahara, we get married, we have families. You ask a Yid, how will you pay tuition next month? I have no idea. Especially if a person has his own business. It's mamash mandan hashmaim. It's good that what we already are trained by our parents. We have that emunah. Then it was a new thing. Says in Mitzrayim, it was set. There were taka slaves, but a slave doesn't worry where the food is coming tomorrow. The master will provide. Like a child is not worried about food. The parents will provide. In the desert, no, we graduated. And if you have bread in your basket, you feel calm. The man was a daily allowance. That's one meaning of vaya'ancha, or the words laman anoischa, right? It was the nesoyan and the inui was connected to not having food tomorrow. Another word that eino doima misha roya v'oichel lemisha eino roya v'oichel. Can't compare someone who can see their food versus someone who cannot see their food. Now hold on, how did they not see their food? They saw the manna. The Torah describes how the manna looked like. Now it was then the taste that they experienced while eating the manna, that's the chazals over here, that you can taste either all of the tastes in the world, or when they complain that it doesn't taste like, and the Torah enumerates a couple of foods, it didn't taste like that, or according to other midrashim, it would taste like any food you wanted. But when they complained about the few foods that the manna was not connected to, that was, you not only tasted the food, but you felt the texture. Because if you wanted to eat a medium rare steak, it didn't only taste like that, it had the texture of it. But the few things that they complained about, it didn't have that texture. We'll see more about that tomorrow. But you didn't see that, and that was the affliction. Said, like that second to last line in Rashi, that achilas haman toyim tam kol aminim, but ve'ein roya elamon. Now, when Rabbi Yosef heard that, he got excited. Why did he get excited? That Rabbi Yosef sadly was blind. And he knew that his eating experience is nish. Couldn't see it anymore. It didn't have the same time. But just because that was his subjective experience, it doesn't mean it's emes. But the moment you hear something in Torah, you say, aha. Amar Rabbi Yosef mikan, from the second shot, that it's called affliction because you can't see it, is a remes lesumin, that my experience is emes, that they eat, and he never felt fully satisfied. Because since he never saw the food, there was an element of inoi in the eating. Amar Abaye, Hilkach, man, the Islay Sudasa, if you have a meal, only eat it when you can see it. And by the way, one of the pshatim, right down in Shabbos, when you were teaching over there, that native Shabbos Kodesh, pasha to see the food. to see what you're eating, because it's going to give you a greater amount of satisfaction, and you're going to be fulfilling the mitzvah of oinig. Let's chop one more line over here. Amar Abu Zera, Mikra, King Solomon, Koi Helas, Toiv Mareinayim, Mahaloch Nafesh. Better is the seeing in the eyes, right, than the experience of the soul. That's the pshat. That's the pshat. Again, a pasuk in Mishlei, that when you when you eat, you experience it. Even better is when you see it. And Omer Shlakish, this is what we learned on Daf Chavtes. Remember, Hirurei Aveda Kashim Kaved, and the negative. That Toiv Mare Inayim Be'isha, that the pleasure, this can be a non-kosher pleasure that you have by looking at a woman, is more than the Gufa Shel Maisa. Shenemer, as it says, Toiv Mare Inayim Mahaloch Nefesh, and that's Taka, the Hirurei Aveda Kashim Kaved. And just to end on a positive note, that's why Hasidim would sit by a Fabrengen, they don't understand the word of Yiddish, they couldn't hear a word of the Rebbe, because looking at a tzaddik, just looking, is even greater on a certain level than hearing, than understanding. God willing, to be continued. That was a good word.